Myself Suryanshi Singh from MA first year, here to present on a comparative analysis of political development and decay in post-colonial states. So when we study political development and decay in post-colonial states, we have to understand these three terms separately. Political development is a process through which a state strengthens its political institutions and governance through effective governance structures, democratic parties, and rule of law. Political decay is a situation where a state's political institutions deteriorate, which leads to authoritarianism, corruption, and social unrest. A colonial state is one which is established under a colonial rule. Therefore, a post colonial state is the one that emerges after decolonization, that is, a transition from a colonial state to independence. Now, these post colonial states are affected by their colonial legacy either in the form of weak institutions, ethnic fragmentation, economic dependency, or in the form of successful transition. Now, let us see the case of India, which is in South Asia. India presents a case of democratic survival amidst deep diversity, poverty, and colonial legacy. Post independence, the country established constitutional democracy, universal adult franchise, independent institutions, and regular elections. But these were suspended during emergency, and post emergency, we see a return to democratic elections but with centralization of power. The country faces rising communal polarization and majoritarianism, which is common to most post colonial states. The country has an active civil society. So, all over in India, we see a case of coexistence of political development and decay. Now, let us talk about Nigeria, which is in Africa. Here we see a case of development and decay in a resource rich nation. So, Nigeria presents a case of military dictatorship with continuous attempts at democratization. The country has huge oil wealth, which is both a source of economic development as well as authoritarianism. Post independence, it faced economic instability, ethnic tension, military coup, human rights abuse, and political repression. 1991 saw a return to democracy, but at the cost of electoral fraud, vote buying, and ethnic manipulation. 2015 saw political development as the first ever peaceful transition of power, yet the separatist threats remained. The country has an instrumental civil society which fights for reforms, good governance, against police brutalities, and transparency. So, Nigeria presents a case of transition from military to civil government where political decay still remains. Iran presents an exceptional post-colonial case as a country which was never formally colonized but had a strong foreign influence in the form of Britain and America. It represents a hybrid regime that is theocratic yet electorally functional. A theocratic regime is one where the religious head is also the head of the state. 1979 saw Islamic revolution which was both anti-colonial and anti-monarchical through mass mobilization. It led to the establishment of a hybrid theocratic regime which had elected institutions under non-elected elites. 2009 saw presidential elections as well as movement for accountability, and at present the country faces protests against moral policing and criminalization of dissent and loss of state legitimacy challenged by students, professionals, and women. So all over, the country presents a paradox of populism versus divine. When we see Indonesia, we see development and decay in transition as a shift between authoritarianism and democracy. Post-independence, the country faced military coup, economic crisis, religious and ethnic tension, but stood as a model of democratic transition in the 21st century in the Muslim world. The country faced Sukarno's guided democracy, which sidelined parliamentary institutions, political instability, stagnation, and a failed communist coup. This was followed by Suharto's New Order regime, which promised economic growth, modernization, and infrastructure, but at the cost of civil liberty, freedom, and democracy. This, at last, was followed by a Reformasi era, which had democratic institutions, direct presidential elections, and new political parties. The country still faces corruption, Islamic conservatism, and restricted freedom of expression, but student activism, civil society, and media keep the society in check. Now we see Colombia, which is in South America. It presents a case of violent conflict, corruption amid quest for democratic stability, and a transition from violent to an increasingly stable democracy. Post-independence, the country faced elite domination and violence and political decay in the form of corruption, paramilitary violence and drug trade, riots, civil wars, guerrilla groups, drug cartels, and systematic corruption. 2000 saw a transition from open warfare to peace progress through the efforts of civil society and human rights organization, yet criminal organization remain active in rural areas. Therefore, we see a case of political development tempered by weak state presence. Now here is a comparative table based on the previous analysis of India, Nigeria, Iran, Indonesia, and Colombia against different headings. Now we see that these post-colonial states have colonial domination as a common experience, yet they also are faced by unique factors such as ethnic divides, authoritarian rule, revolutionary change, external influence, which shape decay or development. Now we see that India presents a case of democratic values and aspiration, whereas Nigeria presents a struggle between democracy and military rule. Iran stands as an exceptional case, whereas Indonesia stands as a transformation from dictatorship to democracy, and Colombia a state of peace amidst violence. Conclusion, we see that these 5 countries represent regional diversity and a variety of post-colonial experience, along with a spectrum of political development and decay across continents such as Asia, Africa, Middle East, and Latin America. We also see that political development and decay often coexist together and they cannot exist alone, especially in the case of these post-colonial states. We also see an influence of colonial legacies, especially on institutions, influence of identities and state society representations and relations. So in these post-colonial states, democracy is not secured but continuously defended, and political development is a struggle and not a finished achievement. Thank you.